Speaking of Japan's Yakuza, what's everyone's first impression? Is it the tattoos covering their bodies, missing pinkies, or that intensely xenophobic ideology, swearing loyalty to the emperor, even being lumped in with Japan's ultra-nationalist far right? As for the idea that they're Japan's nationalist enforcers, I don't think anyone would disagree. But right inside this organization, one that shouts the Japanese Empire and pushes out foreigners, if you open up the roster of the top bosses at the very highest level, you'll see an extremely absurd list of names. Head of the 7th generation Sakeyu Megumi, Kanayama Kozaburo, real name Kim Jae-hak. Chairman of Kyoku Tokai, Matsuyama Shinichi, real name Cho Kyu-hwa. Chairman of Matsubakai, Makino Kuniyasu, real name Lee Chun-seong. Chairman of the 3rd generation Fukuhaku Kai, Nagaoka Torao, real name Kim In-soon. Does that feel strange? A Japanese ultra-right-wing gang empire that constantly shouts, "Keep foreigners out." Yet more than half of its territory was built by Koreans, so much so that even the Godfather sitting in the top seat is of Korean descent. According to internal reports from Japan's Metropolitan Police Department and the Public Security Intelligence Agency, at the peak of the Yakuza's power, more than 30% of its members were actually Koreans or North Koreans living in Japan. In some core armed groups known as hit squads, that proportion was even as high as 60% to 90%. And yet, the total number of Koreans in Japan was only about 430,000, making up just 0.3% of Japan's population. So, why did these Koreans, seen by Japanese society as outsiders, become the backbone of Japan's underworld? Today, we're going to talk about the blood-soaked reality behind this absurd phenomenon. The story begins with Japan's surrender in 1945. At the time, about 2 million Koreans were still living inside Japan. Most of them were forcibly mobilized laborers, doing the most dangerous work in mines and factories. The war ended, and they thought a new life was coming, only to be met with even deeper despair. In 1952, the Japanese government stripped them of Japanese nationality. Overnight, they became stateless people. In that era of rebuilding from ruins, if you were a young Korean living in Japan, you would find every door closed to you. You couldn't enter government institutions, big companies wouldn't hire you, and you would even be refused when trying to rent an apartment or apply for a bank loan. Back then, a saying went around, "We only have 3 roads left. Either spend your whole life rolling in the mud at construction sites, or go back to a homeland that's at war, or join the underworld." For these young men, the Yakuza oddly became the closest thing to equality in all of Japan. The Yakuza runs on something called sakazuki, the sack-sharing oath ceremony. As long as you share that cup of sake, you're the boss's son and a brother to the men beside you. Here, no one looks at your nationality, only whether you're ruthless enough and whether you can make money for the organization. This kind of alternative warmth pushed tens of thousands of Korean youths who had been kicked out by society into the embrace of darkness. In this shadowed history, there are a few names you can't avoid. The first is Machi Hisayuki. His real name was Jong Gaeon-yong. If you've watched films about the underworld of the Showa era, you've definitely seen his shadow. He founded the Tozikai, and at its peak, it had more than 1,500 members. He wasn't some brute who only knew how to fight and kill. He was called the Tiger of Ginza. He controlled all of Ginza's nightlife. Even Japanese political figures and American occupation officers had to come sit in his clubs. Why was he able to be that powerful? Because he acted as an underground ambassador between the Japanese government and the Korean government. At the time, Japan and South Korea had not yet established diplomatic relations, and many political deals that couldn't be brought into the open were passed through this underworld boss. If Machi Hisayuki was the pen, then the other man was absolute the sword. His name was Yanagawa Jiro, real name Liang Won-seok, the founder of the Yanagawa Gumi, the strongest subordinate organization under the Yamaguchi Gumi. In the underworld, this organization had a chilling nickname, the Murder Squad. The vast majority of Yanagawa Gumi members were Koreans living in Japan. Because in Japanese society, they truly had no way back, and when they fought, it was as if they had nothing to lose. It's said that when the Yamaguchi-gumi wanted to expand across Japan, whenever they ran into a tough opponent, they would send in the Yanagawa-gumi. Yanagawa Jiro once said a line that still makes people shudder to this day. "We have no home, no country. Our lives are on this knife." If you think the underworld is just about collecting protection money and getting into street brawls, then you're far too naive. These Korean-descended underworld bosses once reached deep into the darkest political centers in Asia. Have you heard of the Kim Dae-jung kidnapping incident? In 1973, Kim Dae-jung, who later became president of South Korea, was kidnapped from a hotel in Tokyo, and he was nearly thrown into the sea to be fed to the fish. Behind this cross-border kidnapping case, there was deep involvement by Korean-descended Yakuza. At the time, South Korea's intelligence agency, KCIA, in order to operate more conveniently in Japan, directly mobilized the networks and turf of bosses such as Yanagawa Jiro. Even more than that, these gangs also became deeply involved in Japan's right-wing politics. Sounds ironic, doesn't it? A group of Koreans actually joining Japanese right-wing organizations that shout, "The Emperor above all." That's because right-wing activity was, at the time, a huge business. By waving the flag of patriotism, they could openly intimidate companies and interfere in elections. In the 1995 assassination of Murai Hideo, the second-in-command of Aum Shinrikyo, which shocked the world, the attacker was a Korean-descended Yakuza member who claimed to belong to a right-wing group. In this twisted relationship, the Yakuza became the politicians' go-to tool for the dirty work in both Japan and South Korea. To sustain an underworld empire with tens of thousands of people, fighting and killing alone isn't enough. You need money. And what propped up the economic lifeline of Korean-descended Yakuza was pachinko, spread across every street and alley in Japan. For a long time, many Japanese viewed running pachinko as a low-class job, filled with noise and cigarette smoke. It was Koreans in Japan who took over this business. At its peak, more than 90% of pachinko parlors in Japan were operated by people of Korean descent. This was not only a massive industry worth tens of trillions of yen a year, but also a base for Yakuza money laundering and for providing jobs. If you were a Korean-descended young man who had just gotten out of prison, no company would take you. Your older big brother would introduce you to a pachinko parlor to work as a security guard or a floor manager. This closed loop, from economy to violence, allowed Korean-descended Yakuza to take root deeply in Japan's underground world. By the 21st century, this underground empire began to collapse. The Japanese government introduced extremely strict Yakuza exclusion ordinances. Today's gang members can't even go to a bank and open a payroll account. They get kicked out of gyms, and even paying a child's tuition can put them on the police's radar. According to the latest data from 2020 among imprisoned Yakuza members, the proportion holding Korean nationality has already dropped to around 2%. This isn't because discrimination has disappeared, it's because the times have changed. Today, if young Koreans in Japan want to succeed, they choose to study, earn qualifications, enter the entertainment industry, or go into IT. A top-tier tycoon like Masayoshi Son, the head of SoftBank, is also of Korean descent in Japan, and he proved that you don't need knives or guns to rule this country. But we can't forget that the years when gangs ran rampant were, in essence, a scar on Japanese society. If a society denies a portion of its people a path in the sunlight, then they will inevitably carve out a road into the darkness for themselves. When we look back today at the Korean faces inside the Yakuza, what we see is not only the brutality of organized crime, but also the distortion and struggle of an entire group fighting to survive in a foreign land. They were both perpetrators and victims of their time. What do you think about this shadow history? Do you believe the disappearance of the Yakuza truly means the end of discrimination? If you enjoy this kind of criminal history content, feel free to leave a comment below. See you next time.